Welcome, everybody, to another edition of The Great American Story. And we have a real treat for you. I'm Ron Hoon. John Netzel, the creator of The Great American Story, joins us this morning. John, you have lined up a guest for us that I just cannot wait to talk to. Tell us more.
Ron, it is a privilege to have author Alexander Rose join us. Mm-hmm. He is the author of Washington Spies, the story of America's first spy ring, among other books. He has 6 books out. He did The American Rifle, a biography. He did Men of War, The American Experience of Battle of Bunker Hill, Gettysburg, and Iwo Jima. He's a great author, and I should say that his book, Washington Spies, was the story behind the hit series Turn, back in 2014, ran through 2014 to 2017. But that's what we're talking about today. We're talking about Washington's spy ring.
I will just tell you, as Alex joins us live, you're such a fan of this book. You read it, you devoured it. I hadn't read it yet. I was, of course, familiar with it. It was on my list to buy, so I just went ahead and downloaded the audiobook.
Yeah.
And I listened to more than 2.5 hours of it yesterday alone. I didn't want to get out of the car.
It's fascinating. It's fascinating. And I think a lot of people may not realize that George Washington had a spy ring.
Yes,
and,
right?
So I thought, why not have the expert come on and join us? So
okay.
Alex, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate
thanks
having
for having me on. Thanks for the invitation.
So let's dig right in. So set the stage for us. The year is what, 1778 roughly?
Yeah, about that.
And what was it? How did Washington come to need a spy ring? What was the impetus behind that?
Well, if you notice, 1778 is a couple of years after the war. The war's been fought for a couple of years already. What Washington had realized very early on is that he didn't really have any spy apparatus. He had no knowledge of intelligence. He was kind of trying to evolve an intelligence system. He was sort of sending soldiers out to go probe the enemy lines, and then they would come back and bring him back a report or something. But there wasn't anything long-term about it. And then, of course, he'd had the great disaster of Nathan Hale, who was sent into New York, or Long Island in New York, and was quite easily caught and hanged. So, Washington had some, bloody experience with intelligence. But in 1778, what's really disturbing to him is that New York City is the kind of the breadbasket, the sort of the navel of the British Empire in North America during, for the American theater of fighting. And Washington has no eyes or ears in the city itself. He has no idea who is even running the British Army. Not really. Occasionally he gets some newspapers smuggled out, which are very dated and propagandistic, so they're not real. So he doesn't know what's going on. So he has no idea of what the British designs and intentions, and he doesn't know, how many regiments there are, how many cannon they have, all this sort of stuff, which affects his own war planning. So he realizes in about mid 1778 that he needs to get people inside New York City and Long Island, which was the kind of breadbasket of the British Army. He needs to have people stationed behind enemy lines permanently, which is a very difficult thing to do. And so that's where the Culper Ring is established. But those are Washington's sort of strategic aims.
And he understood the need for good intelligence. I mean, he was a general, right? I mean, in your book you quote a letter, I believe it was to Caleb Brewster, where Washington says, "First, do not spare any reasonable expense to come at early and true information, always recollecting and bearing in mind that vague and uncertain accounts of things is more disturbing and dangerous than receiving none at all." So he understood that bad information was worse than no information, correct?
Absolutely. Washington, I mean, when you say Washington was a general, he must have understood intelligence.
Right.
That's actually not true at all, in the sense that there were many generals, and 95% of them didn't understand the virtues and dangers of intelligence. They again, as they just in the 18th century, they more or less relied on soldiers, scouting out the enemy fortifications. That was about it. It didn't go much further than that. There were no intelligence agencies as we know them. 18th century intelligence is a whole different idea. Washington, however, was one of nature's great spy masters. I mean, he was very cautious. He was very skeptical in all things, not just intelligence. And he was very wise. And what Washington realized is that he needed to have spies on the ground, but you have to make sure that when you have spies report to you, that you cross-reference their reports, because spies naturally tend to be fantasists or adventurers. I mean, they're an odd bunch of people, and you have to make sure that what they're saying is true. And so when he's talking to people like, as you mentioned, Caleb Brewster, who was one of the couriers of the Culper Ring, he's passing on instructions of, I don't want to hear exaggerations. I don't want to hear fabrications to try and impress me, or to squeeze money out of me. Just tell me absolute facts. Just keep to the, what is that little phrase, keep to the facts, ma'am. That's essentially the orders that came down from Washington. And when the Culper Ring tended to exaggerate a little bit, or he thought they were making mistakes, he would tell them off. I mean, he was kind of this father figure to them. That's what makes Washington so interesting, and I'd say not quite unique, but almost unique in Anglo-American or even European military commanders of the 18th century.
So he recruits Benjamin Talmadge, if I'm making any errors, please step in, but to create the Culper Ring. So can you kind of describe, kind of share with us how that came into being, and kind of the story behind the name Culper and how that all came to be?
Some of it was by accident. Benjamin Talmadge was this dragoons officer from Long Island who comes up with this idea of, getting his childhood friends. All of the members of the Culper Ring had known each other, apart from one who was a little later, who had known each other for, since they were little kids. They'd played together. Their families had intermarried for generations before in these small towns on Long Island. And so he knew that he could trust them, and that was one of the strengths of what would become the Culper Ring, is that they couldn't be penetrated because they wouldn't let people in who they couldn't trust, and so they couldn't, you couldn't riddle them with informers and double agents and so forth. So Benjamin Talmadge comes to Washington and says, maybe I can get some information out of Long Island. This is after the disaster of Nathan Hale. Washington takes him up on this and lets him recruit his friends. And so that's how the Culper Ring came about. The name Culper it's mysterious about where it comes from. But what I traced it to, it's a kind of an in-joke. When Washington was a much younger man, in Virginia, he'd been, I think, the surveyor of Culpeper County in Virginia, and Culper is a kind of this abbreviation of Culpeper. That's where the name is. That's where the name comes from.
Interesting.
All right, let's talk just a little bit. You mentioned the disaster that was Nathan Hale, and yet you think about how all of the names of people who served him in intelligence gathering, and if you gave the average American a list and said, who of these names have you heard of, it would be Nathan Hale.
Correct.
And yet he wasn't a very good spy. Things didn't go well for him. Maybe just tell us a little bit about what it was he either did or didn't accomplish, and maybe what Washington learned from that, as you say, disaster of Nathan Hale.
Nathan Hale was a very brave, valiant, young soldier. I mean, there's no doubting about it. He meant well. The problem with Nathan Hale, and this is very early in the war, Washington has just been kicked out of New York and Long Island by the British. The problem with Nathan Hale is he's very naive, and this is not entirely his fault. He wasn't briefed. Washington, for instance, didn't have any safe houses on Long Island. Nathan Hale had very little money. He had no contacts. He had these very vague orders to go to Long Island, cross Long Island Sound from Connecticut, go into Long Island and sort of mosey his way to New York City, see what he could find out, and then get out somehow. That was essentially the plan. but within a few days of landing in Long Island, and he's posing as a school teacher, which means he's out of uniform, which is a hanging sentence if because you're a spy, not an officer in uniform. He's caught by Robert Rogers, who is of Robert's range later of Rogers Rangers, who is he's a man who's been around the world, and he's sort of killed a lot of people, and he's highly experienced, and he entraps Nathan Hale, who kind of gives the secret away that, oh, I'm here to spy. And so that's how Nathan Hale ends up being taken to New York City, and he's hanged quite unceremoniously by the British. To them, he's just just another spy. Where the Nathan Hale the great myth or legend or story of Nathan Hale comes across, and his famous last words, "I have only one life to lose for my country," and so on, which he doesn't actually appear to have said. It was from a play that he'd been in, a famous classical play. He had some friends who kind of consecrated him as a bit of a martyr after his execution. And so that's where our great story of Nathan Hale comes from. He was one of the great sacrifices. And what Washington learns is, don't do that again. Washington knew that this had been a debacle. This was that had led to the death of Nathan Hale, which is why when the Culper Ring comes along, he's advanced his spy system quite considerably, and so the culpers are never caught.
Amazing. So we're talking Setauket, New York, right? That's the center of the Culper Ring.
The center of the Culper Ring is a little town called Setauket in Long Island, just a few dozen miles outside of New York. Okay. One of a later addition to the Culper Ring is a man called Robert Townsend, who lives in Oyster Bay, which is just a short distance away.
Got it.
Yeah.
Well, we're about to go to a break here, but we always go to the break with a trivia question. You know the answer to this, I'm sure. And we'll answer it when we come back from the break. But Nathan Hale and Benjamin Talmadge were both involved in espionage during the American Revolutionary War. What connection did they share prior to their military service that influenced their roles in the war? Don't answer it yet, Alex. But A, they were childhood friends from the same town. B, they were classmates at Yale College. And C, they served together in the same regiment.
Okay,
Ron, do you know the answer?
I think I picked that up in the first 2.5 hours of intense listening yesterday in the car. But we'll have the guess for you. You can play along. We'll be back after a 2-minute break. Welcome back to The Great American Story. It's Ron and John, and we're having a great time today. Hanging out with one of the truly great authors. When you think about Washington's Spies, Alex Rose accomplished something that not only did he create a great book, it then became maybe even a more popular television series.
Yes.
We got to find out from him about that here in the next minute or two.
We do.
What goes into the making of a book versus what goes into the making of a great series.
Yeah.
But let's get to our poll question, or to our trivia question, Johnny.
There we go. Yeah. So what connection did Nathan Hale and Benjamin Talmadge have prior to their military service? Alex, I'll let you answer this one because I know you know. Wait, actually, Ron.
Yeah, I think I know. I believe it's that they were classmates, right, at Yale? Is that correct?
Is the correct answer.
There you go.
Boy,
that's right.
Yeah.
There you go.
Both Yaleys.
Yeah. Well, he was, and Nathan Hale was such a young guy. You know,
they were all very young.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
But Talmadge and Hale were very good friends at Yale. Together.
Yeah.
So that's another reason why Talmadge was very hurt by the fact that Hale was hanged. So he was it was a slight element of revenge, or to get justice for his late friend.
One of the things that I wanted to find out from you about is I'm always fascinated by how you come up when great authors come up with great stories. You might say it kind of writes itself. History is history. But where did the light bulb go off for you on this one? Alex, where you said, "Oh gosh, this will be a great book"?
Oh, and the Washington Spies.
Yeah.
If I recall, this was about 2004. It was quite a while ago, and I was reading a book about, I think, Benedict Arnold, and I think I was also reading a book at the same time um, about Kim Philby, the British traitor of the 1950s and 60s, and I began thinking, oh, what happens if you thought about Benedict Arnold as this kind of Kim Philby figure involved in intelligence. And I thought, well, there must be, a bunch of books about intelligence during the American Revolution. I mean, this is such an obvious subject to have done. Someone must have done this a bunch of times. And I couldn't find anything. I went to the card catalogs. We still had card catalogs in those days, and
Wow.
in the ye olde days.
Yeah.
And I couldn't find anything. And and then I began looking into George Washington and spying, thinking again, this must have been covered. And I mean, everything else about Washington is being covered, and just there was nothing coming up. So once I had that, the general idea, then I started sort of digging around because you want to personalize a story. Otherwise, you end up with a 1,000-page book about intelligence during the American Revolution that it's not connected in any way. It's just a bunch of facts and figures.
Yeah.
Right.
So then after a while, I found the Culper Ring, and I thought, when I discovered that there were something like 150 of their letters, their personal letters, in the Washington archives in the Library of Congress, that's when I knew that I'd struck gold, because here you have, through their own letters, their characters come out, their real names, their hopes, their ambitions, their fears, all this kind of stuff, their mistakes, things like that. You had the biography of, if you put it all into chronological order, you had the biography of George Washington's private spy ring, and through that you could live through Washington and how he dealt with these very personal spies of his, because as I said before, he took a very fatherly interest in them.
Now I'm visualizing.
That's when I had it.
Yeah, I'm visualizing you writing. I don't know if it's like a David McCullough situation with his old typewriter, you know, or if you're just
an old
working on
computer,
your,
I think,
yeah,
is more.
yeah. But so you're writing along, and I told John, I said, I just love your writing style. I said, I got to ask him, do these great lines that you have in the book just literally kind of pop into your head? You write, this goes back to when Washington knew that the assault was going to be coming from the British there in Manhattan, kind of in the early days. And you write, and he had a ragtag bunch, and it seemed like they were gradually dissipating and going from 20,000 strong to, I think the number you had was about 3,000. And you said, these few were expected to dissipate the fury of an empire.
Oh,
I mean, that's a
what
great line.
A great
How did that
line.
even come to you?
What a great line.
Well, it's very nice of you to say. It's difficult to know how to answer. I'm a writer, so my job is to come up with words. I think, as you mentioned before, David McCullough said it. I think put it best, as he did in so many other things. When you're writing history, you've got to paint pictures with words, and that's what I try and do. And again, I'll let you into the dirty little secret that a writer, or in my case, I don't just type it and go, all right, that's done, and it's beautiful and perfect from the very beginning. No. The editing takes much longer. The polishing and the honing and the sanding takes much longer than, oddly enough, than the actual writing.
Some of the spycraft involved in the Culper Ring. I wanted you to hit on some of that, and were they ahead of their times when it came to the ciphers and the invisible ink, that kind of stuff? How did that all work out?
Yeah, the Culper Ring this is relatively speaking, the Culper Ring were very advanced for their era in terms of, they used an invisible ink that had been invented by John Jay's brother, interestingly enough. Wow. And they used a kind of a without getting too technical, a kind of a substitution code, a very basic one, the kind of thing where 712 stands for Washington, or 367 is New York, that kind of thing. Now today kind of laughable. I mean, honestly, I mean,
Yeah.
an 8-year-old could crack
Yeah.
some of these codes.
Right.
As to the invisible ink, in the book, I takes, using various clues, trying to work out what exactly the ingredients were, because it was very difficult to make the invisible ink.
They ran out of it, right? I mean, there was a shortage of it at one point.
Oh, there was always a shortage, so Washington always encouraged them to write short. Don't wait. And there was one time, I think, when one of the spies, he's writing his letter, and I think he gets startled. I think it's his niece. It's his niece turns out to be on his door, and he thinks it's the British coming to come and get him. And so he knocks it over, and he just wastes months worth of ink all over the place. They can't be, but they can't be gotten back. But so yeah, for the time they used advanced stuff. But again because it's spycraft or technology, there's always problems. I think there was one time I remember, and again the Culper Ring do make mistakes, as does Washington. They learn as they go. There are no instruction manuals. We tend to forget that. There's no one to teach them how to do stuff. But there's one time when I think one of the spies gets a kind of a cord of paper, a stack of paper, blank paper. And he writes his letter in invisible ink, and he thinks it's brilliant. He's going to just insert the so-called blank piece of paper inside the other paper and send it to Washington. And unfortunately, he forgets to tell Talmadge, where he inserted the blank piece of paper inside the other blank pieces of paper, so it gets a completely wasted opportunity. So they has to do the whole thing over again. So there's a lot of a lot of that kind of sort of amusing stories about them.
So what were some of the successes of the Spy Ring? I mean, they did have their success, and I assume the main thing was the Rhode Island, the French troops in Rhode Island. But I wanted you to kind of hit on some of their successes.
Yeah, the Culper Ring had a lot of what I like to call, small successes, which are actually much more important than one large success. We tend to think in terms of movies, it's always, 007 has to get the secret weapon, otherwise the world will be destroyed. Real intelligence work, the kind of stuff that Washington and the Culper Ring did, that never really happens, that kind of Hollywood MacGuffin stuff. But what happened? The big success with the Culper Ring was that they survived almost the entirety of the war. From the day they started until the very end of the war, they were undetected. None of them were ever caught. They supplied on a continual basis intelligence to Washington. For, as I said, I think 4 or 5 years. And that in itself gave Washington a huge amount of strategic intelligence, and also political intelligence, and just pure military intelligence that he really required at key moments in the war. So their success was helping Washington win the war. That's what they did.
And they helped catch a British spy, if I'm not mistaken, right? John Andre, right?
They were involved in the Benedict Arnold thing. The Benedict Arnold betrayal. But yes, they were, John Andre was hunting, he was the sort of the British head of intelligence, and he goes on his fatal mission to bring Benedict Arnold to betray West Point, and he's caught. John Andre is actually accompanied to his site of execution by Benjamin Talmadge from the Culper Ring, and they actually have a discussion about Nathan Hale. And John Andre hadn't been there at the time. He sort of vaguely heard his name, but Benjamin Talmadge tells him, Nathan Hale was my friend, and what happened to him is going to happen to you. And it's a kind of almost like a tragic sort of John le Carré moment in intelligence history.
Well, I suppose with just a minute or two left here, we should find out what your next great story is you're going to share with us. What's that all about?
Oh, I thought you'd never ask. No, I have a book coming out on May 20th. Again, it's a little bit about intelligence, but it's set in World War II. If you don't mind, it's called if you don't mind me doing this, it's called Phantom Fleet. The Hunt for Nazi Submarine U-505 and World War II's Most Daring Heist. And it's about the U.S. Navy's hunt and heist of a German U-boat, as I said, during World War II. And you can go see that U-boat in Chicago, in the Griffin Museum of Science and Industry. They've actually got the U-boat. So it's an incredible, thrilling tale. I mean, really fascinating, and I thought. So it's coming out in about a month.
Fantastic.
Great Father's Day gift.
There you are.
Yes,
right?
I quite agree.
There you go. Our-
My birthday is just a few days before that, John.
There
you
we
can
go.
pre-order it
There we
and
go.
then deliver it to me right after the birthday. Oh, Alex, we've really enjoyed our time with you today.
Yes.
This has just been great.
Yeah, our guest is Alex
Thanks for having
Rose.
me.
Read this
fun.
book if you haven't read it. Read it. It's a good one. Washington Spies. Yeah. Thanks for joining us, Alex. It's been a pleasure.
It's a pleasure.
Thanks for being a part of it, and we'll look forward to chatting with you maybe later about this next book.
Absolutely.
Good. And thank you for watching The Great American Story.